The Millionaire family laughed when they learned their only compatible donor was a cleaning lady's son. But when they saw the boy walking alone in a surgery, everyone fell silent. Michael's hand trembled as he watched the nurse prepare the needle. The fluorescent lights of Phoenix General Hospital's public wing buzzed overhead, making the cream-colored walls look even more washed out. His mother, Sarah, sat next to him in the cramped examination room, her cleaning uniform still carrying the smell of bleach from her morning shift. "It's just a routine blood test, honey," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "Look away if you need to." Michael nodded, his throat too dry to speak. He was 13, too old to cry about needles, but his heart wouldn't stop racing. The plastic chair squeaked as he shifted his weight. "I need you to stay still for me," the nurse said, tying the rubber tourniquet around his arm. Her name tag read Nancy. She had kind eyes, but Michael couldn't focus on them. All he saw was the needle. The door burst open, making everyone jump. A doctor in a white coat rushed in, his face flushed. "Nancy, we need to check his blood type again. The one from last month's records." Nancy frowned, looking up from Michael's arm. "Dr. Roberts, I'm in the middle of, it's urgent." The doctor's eyes darted to Michael, then back to Nancy. "The Thompson case?" Michael watched as Nancy and the doctor stepped into the corner, speaking in hushed tones. He caught fragments of their conversation: rare match and running out of time and private wing. His mother leaned forward. "Is everything okay?" Dr. Roberts turned around, as if just remembering they were there. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "Mrs. Johnson, there's something we need to discuss. Your son's blood work from his checkup last month showed a very rare compatibility marker." Michael's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "There's a patient, a young girl, who needs a bone marrow transplant. She's been on the registry for months, but finding a match is incredibly difficult. Your preliminary results suggest you might be compatible." The fluorescent light flickered, casting strange shadows on the doctor's face. Michael felt his mother's hand tighten on his shoulder. "You want his bone marrow?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Dr. Roberts nodded. "We need to run more tests to confirm, but yes, potentially. The patient is Sarah Thompson. Her father is Richard Thompson," Michael's mother finished. "I cleaned their offices downtown." The silence that followed felt heavy. Michael remembered the Thompson building, where his mother worked extra shifts. 50 stories of glass and steel reaching into the Arizona sky. "Would it hurt?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nancy stepped forward, her expression gentle. "We're just talking about testing right now, honey. One step at a time." But Michael wasn't listening anymore. His mind had traveled back 2 years, to another hospital room. His grandmother lying in bed, her breath shallow, the doctor saying if they'd caught it earlier, if they'd had better insurance. The memory made his chest tight. "Can I think about it?" he asked. Dr. Roberts checked his watch. "Of course, but we need to start testing soon. Sarah doesn't have much time." Michael looked at his mother. Her face was tight with worry, but she managed a small smile. "It's your choice, baby. No one could force you." The next hour passed in a blur of forms and explanations. More blood draws, each needle stick making Michael wince. They moved him to a different room, this one with newer equipment and chairs that didn't squeak. The private wing, someone mentioned. Through a window in the hallway, Michael caught a glimpse of another family. A man in an expensive suit paced back and forth, while a woman in pearls dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The Thompsons, he realized. The girl's parents. Later, as they walked to the bus stop, the Arizona sun beating down on them, Michael's mother was unusually quiet. "Mom," he said, "what do you think I should do?" She stopped walking, turning to face him. Her uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes life gives us chances to be bigger than ourselves. But those chances often come with a price." Michael nodded, understanding more than she probably thought. He'd seen the price of things all his life in past due notices, in his father's exhausted face after night shifts, in generic brand cereals and hand-me-down clothes. That night, lying in bed, Michael could hear his parents talking in low voices in the kitchen. His father had just gotten home from his security job, still in his uniform. "They're talking about more tests tomorrow," his mother was saying. "I don't know, James." He's just a boy who could save a life, his father replied. Michael pulled his pillow over his head, but he couldn't block out the weight of the choice ahead. Outside his window, the stars were barely visible through Phoenix's light pollution, just like they were barely visible from the Thompson building where his mother scrubbed floors after hours. His phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Preliminary results promising. Please come in tomorrow for additional testing. Michael stared at the message until his screen went dark. In the darkness of his room, he could almost pretend this wasn't happening, that he wasn't holding someone else's life in his hands, that he wasn't scared. But he was scared, terrified actually, not just of the needles or the tests or whatever might come after. He was scared of the responsibility, of the weight of it all. Another memory of his grandmother surfaced, her teaching him to make buttermilk biscuits, saying sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing, sugar. Michael turned over in bed, his sheets tangled around his legs. Down the hall, his parents were still talking, their voices a low murmur of concern and love and worry. Tomorrow, he would have to decide. Tomorrow, he would have to be brave or walk away. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. But for now, in the quiet of his room, Michael Johnson was just a 13-year-old boy trying to fall asleep, trying not to think about needles or bone marrow or dying girls in private hospital wings. Trying not to think about how sometimes the right thing and the hard thing were the same thing. The night stretched on, and somewhere in the city, in a private hospital room with a view of the mountains, another teenager lay awake, waiting for a miracle she didn't know might come in the form of a cleaning lady's son. Morning came too quickly. Michael stood in the hospital lobby, watching the Thompson family through the glass doors of the private wing. His mother had already left for her cleaning job, leaving him with his father, who had come straight from his night shift, still in his security uniform. "You ready, son?" his father asked, stifling a yawn. Michael nodded, even though he wasn't ready at all. His stomach felt like it was full of rocks. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. A nurse led them past the Thompson family, who were huddled around a tablet, talking in low voices. Michael caught fragments of their conversation. Only match they found. "But who are they?" "Cleaning lady's kid." Mr. Thompson looked up briefly, his expensive watch catching the morning light. Their eyes met for a second before the man looked away, turning back to his tablet. The nurse showed them to a consultation room. Unlike yesterday's cramped examination space, this one had leather chairs and paintings on the walls. A large window overlooked the parking lot where Michael could see the Thompsons' black SUV parked next to his father's rusty Toyota. Dr. Roberts entered, carrying a stack of papers. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson, Michael. The initial results are very promising. Michael's tissue type is an extremely rare match for Sarah." "How rare?" his father asked, straightening in his chair. "One in several 100,000. We've been searching the international registry for months." Dr. Roberts spread some papers on the desk. "We'd like to proceed with more detailed testing today." Michael's father leaned forward, his security badge catching on his shirt pocket. What exactly would that involve? As Dr. Roberts explained the procedure, Michael watched a group of people gathering near the nurse's station. More of the Thompson family had arrived. Men in suits, women in designer clothes, all of them speaking in hushed, urgent tones. A younger woman in high heels noticed him watching and whispered something to an older man beside her. The man frowned, shaking his head. "Michael?" Dr. Roberts' voice pulled him back. "Do you have any questions?" "Will it hurt?" It was the second time he'd asked this question in 2 days. "The testing today? Just a few more blood draws. If you're confirmed as a match and decide to donate, that procedure would be more involved. We need to extract bone marrow from your hip bone under general anesthesia." Michael's father's hand found his shoulder. "He'd be asleep? No pain during the procedure? No. There would be some discomfort during recovery, but nothing a strong young man like Michael couldn't handle." Strong young man. Michael didn't feel strong. He felt small, especially when he saw more Thompson relatives arriving, their expensive clothes and confident walks making him conscious of his worn sneakers and secondhand jeans. The morning passed in a blur of needles, forms, and medical terms Michael couldn't understand. His father dozed in the waiting room chair between tests, exhausted from his night shift. Around noon, a commotion drew Michael's attention. Through the window, He saw a girl being wheeled down the hallway. Sarah Thompson. She was pale, almost as white as the hospital sheets, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked closer to death than the living. "That's her," a nurse whispered to another. "Poor thing doesn't have much time left." Michael watched as the Thompson family surrounded her wheelchair like a protective wall. Mrs. Thompson walked alongside, one manicured hand on her daughter's shoulder, while Mr. Thompson spoke urgently with the doctor. "Time for one more test," the nurse called to Michael. "Then you can go home." That evening, Michael sat at their small kitchen table, pushing his food around his plate. His mother had come home from work early, still in her cleaning uniform. His father would sleep through dinner, needing rest before his next shift. "They're all watching me," Michael said. "The Thompson family. Like they're not sure about me." His mother set down her fork. "What do you mean, baby?" "I heard them talking. About us. About you being a cleaning lady." She was quiet for a moment. "Some people think money makes them better than others. But money can't buy what you have in your heart. What if—" Michael hesitated. "What if they don't want my help because I'm—" He gestured to his skin. His mother's face hardened. "Then that's their loss. But that girl, Sarah? She needs help. And you might be the only one who can give it." The phone rang, making them both jump. His mother answered it, listening quietly before hanging up. "That was the hospital," she said. The detailed test came back. "You're a perfect match." Michael pushed his plate away, no longer hungry. "What happens now?" "Now you decide. But first, you should try to get some sleep." Sleep didn't come easily. Michael lay in bed, his phone lighting up with messages from school friends who had somehow heard about everything. "You gonna be famous? But they'll pay you millions." "Don't do it, they're just using you." He turned off his phone, but the silence was worse. In it, he could hear his parents talking in their room. They looked at him like he was nothing, his mother was saying. "Like we were nothing. Pride won't save that girl's life," his father replied. "I know. But he's our baby, James. Our only child." Michael pulled his blanket over his head, but their words followed him into his dreams. He dreamed of hospital corridors that never ended, of needles that turned into snakes, of a pale girl in a wheelchair asking why he wouldn't help her. He woke up gasping at 3 a.m. Down the hall, he could hear his father getting ready for his shift at the security company. Michael padded to the kitchen, where his father was making coffee. "Can't sleep?" his father asked. Michael shook his head. His father poured a second cup of coffee, adding extra milk and sugar the way Michael liked it. They sat at the kitchen table, the only sound the humming of the old refrigerator. "When I was your age," his father said, "my old man told me that a man's character is built in moments when nobody's watching. When there's no reward, no recognition. Just doing what's right because it's right." Michael wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "But everyone is watching." "True. But that's not why you're thinking about doing this, is it?" Before Michael could answer, his father's phone buzzed. Time to leave for work. Standing up, his father adjusted his security uniform. "Whatever you decide, son, decide it for the right reasons. Not for them. Not for us. For yourself." As the sun rose over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michael's phone lit up with a text from Dr. Roberts. "Need your decision by noon today. Sarah's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Please call when you wake up." Michael stared at the message, his coffee now cold and untouched. In a few hours, he would have to give his answer. And no matter what he decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital waiting room felt colder than yesterday. Michael sat between his parents as Dr. Roberts outlined the donation procedure, his voice steady and clinical. The surgery would take about 2 hours, Dr. Roberts explained, pointing to a diagram. "We'll extract the bone marrow through 2 small incisions in your hip bone." Michael's mother gripped his hand. "And the risks?" "There's always risk with general anesthesia. Some pain afterward, possible infection." Dr. Roberts paused. "But Michael is young and healthy. The risks are minimal." A knock on the door interrupted them. A woman in a blue blazer poked her head in. "Dr. Roberts? Channel 12 News is here. They're asking about the Thompson case." Michael's stomach dropped. "News?" "Word got out," Dr. Roberts said, frowning. "The Thompsons are well known in Phoenix. Their daughter's condition has been in the local media." Through the window, Michael saw a news van in the parking lot. A reporter was setting up a camera. "We don't want any media attention," his father said firmly. "Unfortunately, it's already out there." Dr. Roberts handed them a local newspaper. On page 3 was a small headline: "Local teen may save Thompson heiress." Michael stared at the article. They'd used his school photo without permission. The words blurred together. "Son of a cleaning lady, rare match." Thompson family declined to comment. His phone buzzed. Messages from classmates. "Saw you on the news. You're gonna be famous. Bet they'll make you rich." The door opened again. This time it was a hospital administrator looking nervous. "The Thompson family's lawyers are here. They want to discuss arrangements." Michael's father stood up. "Arrangements? Legal matters. Compensation? Privacy agreements?" "We haven't even decided yet," Michael's mother interrupted. "But they had to decide. Soon." Dr. Roberts had made that clear. Sarah Thompson was running out of time. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings. Lawyers in expensive suits explained things Michael barely understood. His parents asked questions about medical bills, recovery time, insurance. During a break, Michael went to get water. In the hallway, he heard voices around the corner. "Can't believe our only option is the cleaning lady's kid. What choice do we have? Sarah's getting worse. But what will people say? The press is already having a field day." Michael's hands shook as he filled his paper cup. The water spilled over the edges, wetting his sleeve. Back in the consultation room, more doctors arrived. They wanted to do preliminary tests, just in case. More needles, more forms, more explanations. "Michael," a nurse touched his arm. "Are you okay? You look pale." He wasn't okay. The room was spinning. His chest felt tight. "I need air," he gasped. His mother followed him into the hallway, where he slid down the wall to sit on the floor. "Baby, breathe," she said, kneeling beside him. "Just breathe. Everyone's watching," he whispered. "Everyone's waiting. Forget everyone else. This is about you and that girl. Just you and her." But it wasn't that simple. Nothing was simple anymore. When they returned home that evening, reporters were waiting outside their small house. Camera flashes went off as they hurried inside. "No comment," his father said firmly, shielding Michael from the cameras. Inside, Michael went straight to his room. He could hear the TV in the living room. His story was on the evening news. A touching tale of two families from different worlds. The Thompson family, pillars of the Phoenix business community. Their daughter's only hope may lie with the son of one of their employees. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Instagram, Twitter, messages from people he didn't even know. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to know what he would do. At school the next day, it was worse. "Hey, rich boy," someone called in the hallway. "Gonna buy a mansion with that Thompson money?" During lunch, a group of kids he barely knew sat at his table. "You should ask for $1 million, one boy said. "They're loaded." "My mom says they're just using you," a girl added. "Says they look down on people like us." Michael left his lunch untouched and went to hide in the library. But even there, he could hear people whispering about him. After school, he found his mother waiting in their old car instead of taking the bus like usual. "Thought you might want to avoid the reporters," she said. On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "The hospital called. Sarah had a bad turn last night. They need your decision by tomorrow morning." Michael watched the Phoenix streets pass by. Palm trees swayed in the hot wind. Outside the Thompson building where his mother cleaned offices at night, people in business suits hurried past homeless men sleeping in the shade. Two worlds. That's what everyone kept saying. Two different worlds colliding because of him. At home, he went straight to his room and closed the door. On his desk was the permission form from the hospital. He needed to check yes or no. Simple as that. Just a pen mark in a box. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Michael." It was Dr. Roberts. "I know this is hard, but I need to tell you something. I just came from Sarah's room. She's scared, just like you are. She asked me today if it would hurt you, the procedure. She was worried about you." Michael's throat felt tight. She was? Two scared kids. That's all this is really about. Not money or fame or different worlds. Just two kids who need each other. After hanging up, Michael sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the form. Outside, he could hear reporters talking, camera equipment being packed up as the sun set. In the kitchen, his parents were making dinner. The smell of his mother's cooking filled the house. Simple food, made with love. So different from the catered meals he'd seen being delivered to the Thompsons' private hospital wing. Two worlds, two families, two kids. Michael picked up a pen. The weight of it felt enormous in his hand, like it weighed more than all the Thompson fortune, more than all the news cameras, more than all the whispers and stares and expectations. He looked at his phone one last time. A new message had come in, this one from an unknown number. This is Sarah's mom. I know we come from different worlds. I know my family hasn't made this easier. But please, she's my baby girl. Michael closed his eyes, thought of his grandmother, thought of Sarah in her hospital bed, thought of his mother cleaning offices at night, thought of right things and hard things being the same thing. He opened his eyes and looked at the form again. His hand was steady now as he reached for the pen. Michael's sneakers squeaked against the hospital floor as he followed Dr. Roberts through the pre-op wing. More tests. Always more tests. The permission form he'd signed sat in a folder under the doctor's arm. The yes box marked with black ink that had felt permanent as a tattoo. Just a few more evaluations, Dr. Roberts said, checking his clipboard. Psychological assessment first, then a sharp voice cut through the air. I want to speak to the board about this. Immediately, Michael turned to see a woman in an expensive suit striding down the hallway. Her heels clicked against the floor like angry exclamation points. Behind her, Mr. Thompson rubbed his temples. "Diana, please," Mr. Thompson said. "We've been over this. He's a child from God knows where." The woman, apparently Sarah's aunt, said. "Have we done a proper background check? Do we even know if his family—" She stopped abruptly, noticing Michael. Her face flushed, but her eyes remained hard. Dr. Roberts stepped forward. "Mrs. Pearson, I assure you every medical protocol is being followed. Medical protocol isn't my concern." She glanced at Michael again, her lip curling slightly. "This is about my niece, about our family's reputation." Michael's hands curled into fists inside his pockets. He thought about walking away, just turning around and leaving them all behind. But then he remembered Sarah's mother's text, remembered his signature on that form. A new voice joined the conversation. "That's enough, Diana." Sarah's mother emerged from a nearby room. She looked tired, her designer clothes slightly wrinkled from a night spent in the hospital. "Catherine, be reasonable," Diana said. "Think about what people will say." "I'm thinking about my daughter." Mrs. Thompson's voice cracked. "My daughter who is dying while you worry about country club gossip." The corridor fell silent except for the steady beep of distant monitors. Diana's face reddened further, but before she could respond, a hospital psychologist appeared. "Michael, ready for your evaluation." The psychologist's office had a view of the mountains. Dr. Chin sat across from Michael, her notepad balanced on her knee. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked. Michael stared at his hands. "Everyone keeps asking me that. And what do you tell them? What they want to hear." The words came out before he could stop them. Dr. Chin's pen paused. "What do you want to say?" Michael looked out the window. A helicopter was landing on the roof, its blades cutting through the hot Arizona air. "I'm scared," he said finally. "Not just of the surgery. Of everything. Tell me about everything." So he did. He told her about the reporters outside his house, about the whispers at school, about Sarah's aunt in the hallway, about feeling like an alien in this private wing of the hospital with its expensive artwork and leather chairs. "That's a lot for anyone to handle," Dr. Chen said when he finished. "Especially someone your age. Do you think I'm crazy for saying yes?" She smiled slightly. "I think you're braver than most adults I know." The rest of the day blurred by. More blood tests, an EKG, a chest x-ray. Michael's mother had taken another day off work to be with him, while his father caught a few hours of sleep between security shifts. During a break between tests, Michael heard voices from Sarah's room as he passed by. "But what if it hurts him, Mom?" He stopped. It was Sarah's voice, the first time he'd heard it. She sounded weak, but determined. "The doctors say he'll be fine, sweetheart," Mrs. Thompson replied. "But he's doing this for me, a total stranger." "What if?" Michael walked away before he could hear more. His chest felt tight again, but different this time. Later, in another consultation room, Dr. Roberts reviewed the surgery schedule with Michael's parents. Michael watched their faces as the doctor explained recovery times, potential complications, post-op care. The procedure is scheduled for next week, Dr. Roberts said. We'll need Michael to come in the day before for final preparations. A week? Michael's mother frowned. I thought, isn't Sarah running out of time? Dr. Roberts' face tightened. We've started emergency treatments to stabilize her. It's buying us some time, but... He left the sentence unfinished. On their way out, they passed the hospital chapel. Through the open door, Michael saw Mr. Thompson sitting alone in the dim light, his head bowed. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun lazily above his bed, pushing around the hot Phoenix air. His phone lit up with another message from an unknown number. They say you're my match. I'm sorry about my aunt. And everything else. I'm Sarah, by the way. Though you probably knew that already. Michael stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'm Michael. And it's okay. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Are you scared? Michael's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He thought about lying. About being brave. Yes, he typed finally. Me too, came the immediate response. They texted until Sarah's pain medication kicked in and she fell asleep. Michael lay awake long after, thinking about how fear felt the same no matter who you were or where you came from. Morning brought more chaos. The hospital ethics committee wanted to meet. More Thompson relatives had flown in. The media coverage had gone national. In the elevator up to the ethics committee meeting, Michael stood between his parents, all 3 of them dressed in their best clothes, which still looked out of place among the suits and designer outfits around them. Remember, his father said quietly, you can still change your mind. No one would blame you. But that wasn't true anymore, was it? Sarah would blame him. Her mother would blame him. He would blame himself. The elevator doors opened to reveal another day of decisions and divisions, of tests and tensions, of 2 worlds trying to figure out how to collide without breaking. Michael stepped out, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Behind him, he could hear Sarah's aunt talking urgently on her phone. We need to control the narrative. The press is having a field day with this whole cleaning lady's son angle. He walked faster, his mother's hand on his shoulder, his father's steady presence behind him. The weight of everything pressed down on him. Heavier than fear, heavier than responsibility. But somewhere in this same building, a girl named Sarah was fighting for her life. And she was scared too. Sometimes that's all you need to know to keep walking forward. The clock on Michael's bedside table read 11:47 p.m. In less than 8 hours, he'd be at the hospital. His room felt different tonight, like everything in it belonged to a different person from a different time. A time before bone marrow transplants and Thompson family drama and national news coverage. His phone buzzed. Can't sleep either? Sarah texted. No, he replied. Too weird knowing it's tomorrow. They gave me something to help me sleep, but it's not working. Michael sat up in bed, the springs creaking under him. Down the hall, he could hear his parents still awake, their voices a low murmur through the thin walls. His mother had cooked his favorite dinner, fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens. The same meal his grandmother used to make. They'd eaten mostly in silence, the weight of tomorrow hanging over the small kitchen table. Michael, his father had said as they finished, whatever happens tomorrow, we're proud of you. You know that, right? Now, hours later, another text from Sarah lit up his phone. My whole family's here. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They're all sleeping in the waiting room like it's a weird camping trip. Michael thought about Sarah's Aunt Diana, about all the whispered conversations he'd overheard this past week, about the Thompson relatives who looked through him like he was invisible. Must be nice, he typed, then deleted it. Instead, he wrote, try to rest. You too. And Michael? Thank you. No matter what happens. He put his phone down and walked to his window. The street was finally clear of reporters. They'd given up camping outside his house after the hospital announced the surgery date. The moon hung low over Phoenix, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk where he used to play basketball before all this started. His backpack sat ready by the door, packed with everything the hospital said he'd need. Comfortable clothes, his favorite hoodie, his tablet loaded with movies and games. Normal things for a very not normal situation. Michael. His mother's soft knock preceded her entering his room. She was still in her cleaning uniform. She worked a late shift at the Thompson building, refusing to take more time off despite Mr. Thompson's offer to cover her missed work. You should try to sleep, baby. Did you? Before Grandma's surgery? His mother sat on the edge of his bed. No, I was too scared. Just like I am now. I'm doing the right thing, aren't I? You're doing something brave. Sometimes that's more important than right or wrong. She pulled him into a hug, and for a moment he let himself be small again. Let himself need his mother's comfort without worrying about being tough or grown-up. A car alarm went off somewhere in the distance. Through his window, Michael could see his father in the backyard, smoking a cigarette, something he only did when he was really stressed. What if it doesn't work? Michael whispered against his mother's shoulder. What if I go through all this and Sarah still? Then you'll know you tried. That's all anyone can ask of you. The night crept forward. 12:23 a.m. 1:15 a.m. 2:47 a.m. Michael dozed fitfully, waking every time a car passed outside or the house creaked. At 3 a.m., he gave up on sleep and started writing a letter to himself. Dear future Michael, by the time you read this, it'll all be over. One way or another. I don't know if I'm writing this for me or for Sarah or for someone else entirely, but I need to put these words somewhere. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. What do you say to your future self on the night before you might save someone's life? Or fail to save it? His phone buzzed again. This time it was Dr. Roberts. Just checked on Sarah. Her latest numbers aren't good. We might need to move the surgery up. Can you come in at 6 instead of 8? Michael's hands shook as he showed the message to his parents. His mother immediately started heating up leftovers. You need to eat something before we go, while his father called his supervisor to take another day off. I can't lose another job, his father muttered, but he made the call anyway. Michael forced down some chicken and tried not to think about how it might come back up later. His mother packed extra snacks for after the surgery, tucking them into his backpack with careful, loving movements that made his throat tight. At 5 a.m., they piled into their old Toyota. The drive to the hospital was silent except for the rattling of the engine and the local news radio talking about them. Unprecedented case of cross-cultural cooperation. The Thompson family's private jet brought in specialists from questions about compensation and legal arrangements remain. His father switched off the radio. The hospital parking lot was already full, news vans, expensive cars belonging to Thompson relatives, regular people trying to get to their regular medical appointments. As they walked through the automatic doors, Michael's phone buzzed one last time. Sarah again. They just told me they're moving everything up. I'm scared. Michael stared at the message. Through the windows of the private wing, he could see the sun starting to rise over Phoenix. The same sun that had risen every other morning of his life. Except this morning, nothing was the same. Me too, he replied. But we've got this. He didn't know if he believed it, but it felt like what she needed to hear. What they both needed to hear. The elevator ride to the surgical floor felt like ascending to another world. His mother held his hand like she used to when he was small. His father stood straight and tall, still in his security guard uniform, dignity in every line of his tired face. The doors opened to controlled chaos. Nurses rushed past with equipment. Doctors huddled over charts. Thompson family members filled the waiting room, their designer clothes wrinkled from a night of worried waiting. Michael, Dr. Roberts appeared, looking like he hadn't slept either. We need to get started with prep. Say goodbye to your parents here. Goodbye. Such a simple word for such a complicated moment. His mother's hug was fierce, desperate. His father's was gentle, careful, like Michael might break. We'll be right here, his mother said. The whole time, I know, Michael said, and was surprised to find his voice steady. As a nurse led him away, he looked back once. His parents stood together, supporting each other, their faces showing everything they were trying not to say. Behind them, through another window, he caught a glimpse of Sarah being wheeled into prep, her family trailing behind like a well-dressed parade. 2 families, 2 kids, one morning that would change everything. Michael followed the nurse down the corridor, his backpack heavy on his shoulder, his heart heavy in his chest. The letter to himself sat unfinished in his room at home. waiting for whatever words would come after all this was over. The surgical wing doors loomed ahead, their metal surfaces reflecting the rising sun. Michael took a deep breath and stepped forward into whatever waited on the other side. The pre-op room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Michael sat on the edge of the bed in a hospital gown that was too big for him, his feet dangling above the cold floor. Outside his door, he could hear the shuffle of medical staff and the squeak of gurney wheels. Blood pressure's a bit high, the nurse said, removing the cuff from his arm. That's normal, though. Try to relax. Relax. Right. Michael almost laughed. Through his partially open door, he caught fragments of conversation. Risk factors with pediatric donation. Thompson lawyers want additional waivers. Media gathering in the parking lot. A light tap on the door frame made him look up. It was Mr. Thompson, looking uncomfortable in his rumpled suit. May I? He gestured to the room. Michael nodded, his throat too dry to speak. Mr. Thompson stood awkwardly by the bed, his expensive shoes out of place against the scuffed hospital floor. He cleared his throat. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. How's Sarah? Michael asked, wanting to fill the silence. They're prepping her now? Mr. Thompson's hands fidgeted with his tie. Listen about my sister Diana, and some of the things that were said. It's okay. No, it's not. Mr. Thompson's voice cracked slightly. You're doing something I'm not sure I could do at your age. Or any age. Before Michael could respond, Dr. Roberts appeared in the doorway. Mr. Thompson? Sarah's asking for you. After he left, a new nurse came in with more forms behind her. Michael could see his parents in the hallway, his mother pacing, his father standing still as a statue. Okay, Michael, the nurse said, we need to go through the final checklist. Any food or drink in the last 8 hours? He shook his head. Any fever, cough, or other symptoms? Another head shake. Current medications? None. She continued down her list while attaching monitors to his chest and finger. The machines started beeping, measuring his life in electronic pulses. The anesthesiologist will be here soon, she said finally. Do you want to see your parents one more time before? A commotion in the hallway cut her off. Raised voices, urgent footsteps. BP's dropping. Get another line in. Where's Dr. Matthews? Michael's heart rate spiked on the monitor. He knew they were talking about Sarah. Dr. Roberts rushed past his door, shouting orders. The hallway became a blur of scrubs and medical equipment. What's happening? Michael tried to stand, but the nurse gently pushed him back. Stay in bed. Everything's under control. But her face said otherwise. Minutes crawled by. The chaos in the hallway gradually settled into tense efficiency. Michael's parents appeared in his doorway, their faces tight with worry. Baby, his mother started. I'm okay, he said quickly. Really? His father stepped forward. The doctor said there might be more risk now. With Sarah's condition, they said we should know that before. I want to do it, Michael said firmly. I need to do it. A new doctor entered, the anesthesiologist. He began explaining the procedure, but Michael barely heard him. All he could think about was Sarah, somewhere nearby, fighting for her life while everyone argued about risks and waivers and reputations. We normally offer a wheelchair to pre-op, the anesthesiologist was saying, but if you prefer to walk. I'll walk, Michael said. His mother made a small sound, something between a sob and a laugh. Stubborn, just like your grandmother. The walk to the operating room felt like walking through water. Everything moved slowly, dreamlike. His parents could only go so far. There was a line on the floor where they had to stop. His mother's last hug smelled like home and cleaning supplies and love. His father's embrace was brief but tight. Proud of you, son, he whispered. Then Michael was walking alone, his bare feet silent against the cold floor. The operating room doors loomed ahead, their small windows showing glimpses of bright lights and silver instruments. Inside, the room was bigger than he expected and colder. The operating table waited in the center under harsh lights that made everything look too real and not real at all. Up you go, a nurse patted the table. As Michael lay back, he noticed a window high up on one wall. Through it, he could see the observation room, where several doctors stood watching. Among them was Sarah's Aunt Diana, her face unreadable behind the glass. The anesthesiologist appeared above him, holding a mask. Count backward from 10 for me. 10, 9, 8. The lights seemed to blur. 7, 6. Somewhere nearby, another operating room held Sarah, fighting for her life. 5, 4. His grandmother's voice echoed in his head. Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing. 3T. The lights went out. But before they did, in that last moment of consciousness, Michael felt something he didn't expect. Peace. Because no matter what happened next, he had walked into this room on his own 2 feet, had faced his fears and the Thompson family's doubts and the world's expectations. And in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was this: 2 kids, 2 operating rooms, 1 chance to prove that courage doesn't care about bank accounts or skin color or what anyone thinks. The anesthesia pulled him under, and Michael's last thought was a simple one. We've got this, Sarah. We got this. The first thing Michael noticed was the beeping. Steady, rhythmic, annoying. Then came the pain, a deep, throbbing ache in his hips that made him wish for more darkness. Finally, his mother's voice. That's it, baby. Wake up for me. His eyes felt glued shut. Opening them took more effort than it should have. The ceiling came into focus first. White tiles with tiny holes in them. Hospital ceiling. Water, he croaked. A straw touched his lips. The water was room temperature, but felt like heaven. How long? His voice sounded strange to his own ears. About 4 hours, his father answered from somewhere to his left. Everything went fine. Michael tried to move and immediately regretted it. The pain flared sharp and hot. Easy, a nurse appeared in his field of vision. The pain medication is wearing off. We'll get you another dose soon. As his awareness grew, so did the discomfort. His hips felt like someone had driven railroad spikes into them. Every slight movement sent waves of pain through his body. Sarah, he managed to ask. His parents exchanged a look he couldn't quite read. She's still in surgery, his mother said. These things take time. The nurse adjusted something in his fore, and warmth spread through his veins. The pain began to recede, leaving his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. You did good, kid, the nurse said, checking his vital signs. 2 clean extractions. The marrow quality was excellent. Michael wanted to ask more questions, but the medication was pulling him under again. He fought it, trying to stay awake. Rest. His mother's hand smoothed his forehead. We'll be right here. The next time he woke, the light in the room had changed. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting orange stripes across his bed. This time, the pain was duller, more manageable. He could think clearer, too. A doctor he didn't recognize was examining him, pressing gently around the bandages on his hips. Good color, no excessive swelling, the doctor murmured. How's your pain level? Scale of 1 to 10? 6? Michael guessed. Maybe 7 if I move. That's normal. We'll keep you comfortable. The doctor made some notes on his tablet. Any nausea? Michael started to shake his head, then stopped when his stomach lurched. Maybe a little. Also normal. Try some ice chips for now. His parents were still there, looking tired but relieved. His father had changed out of his security uniform into regular clothes. His mother's hair was messy, like she'd been running her hands through it all day. What time is it? Michael asked. Almost 6, his father checked his watch. You've been in and out. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Rapid footsteps, excited voices. Dr. Roberts appeared in the doorway, his surgical cap still on, looking exhausted but smiling. The transplant was successful, he announced. Sarah's numbers are already improving. Michael's mother burst into tears. His father's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. She's in recovery now, Dr. Roberts continued. The next 24 hours are critical, but... He smiled directly at Michael. You gave her a fighting chance. The news spread quickly through the hospital. Michael could hear celebrations from the Thompson family down the hall. More doctors and nurses began stopping by his room, each one thanking him, checking his vitals, adjusting his medication. Around sunset, a surprise visitor arrived, Sarah's mother. She looked worn out but happy, her designer clothes wrinkled from hours of waiting. May I? She gestured to the chair beside Michael's bed. His parents stepped out, giving them privacy. Mrs. Thompson sat quietly for a moment, studying him. Without her usual polish and poise, she looked more human, more real. "The nurses told me you walked into the operating room," she said finally. "No wheelchair. Just walked right in?" Michael shrugged, then winced at the movement. "My daughter is alive because of you." Her voice cracked. "The doctors say, they say it's looking good." "Really good? How is she?" "Sleeping. Like you should be." She reached for his hand, then stopped, uncertain. "I know things haven't been. My family hasn't been." "It's okay," Michael said, meaning it. "No, it's not. But maybe it will be." After she left, the evening settled into a rhythm of vital checks and pain medication doses. His father went home to shower and change before his night shift. His mother curled up in the room's recliner, refusing to leave. The hospital felt different at night. Quieter but not peaceful. More like holding its breath. A young nurse brought him soup, helping him sit up enough to eat a few spoonfuls. "The whole hospital's talking about you," she said as she adjusted his pillows. The boy who walked into surgery. Even some of the older nurses were crying. Michael didn't know what to say to that. He didn't feel brave or special. Just sore and tired and relieved it was over. Later, scrolling through his phone with heavy-lidded eyes, he saw the news headlines. Successful surgery in Thompson case. Miracle match. Two families united by medicine. Phoenix teen's courage saves heiress. He turned off his phone. None of those stories felt real. They weren't about him. Not really. They were about what people wanted to see, wanted to believe. The real story was simpler. Two kids. Two operating rooms, one choice. Around midnight, his mother finally dozed off in the recliner. The night nurse dimmed the lights but left the bathroom door cracked open, casting a thin line of light across the floor. In the quiet, Michael could feel every heartbeat, every breath. The pain in his hips pulsed in time with the monitors. But it was okay. Pain meant he was alive. Meant he'd done something real. His phone lit up with a text. "Unknown number. They say you're awake. This is Sarah. Thank you isn't enough, but thank you." Michael smiled in the darkness. His thumbs moved slowly over the phone screen. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "You?" "Same. But worth it?" "Worth it." They texted until the pain medication pulled him under again. His last conscious thought was that maybe his grandmother had been wrong. Maybe sometimes the right thing and the hard thing weren't the same thing at all. Sometimes the right thing was just right, even when it hurt, even when it scared you, even when the whole world was watching and judging and waiting to see what would happen. Sometimes you just had to walk into that operating room on your own 2 feet and trust that courage was enough. And sometimes, like today, it was 3 days after the surgery. Michael sat propped up in his bed at home, surrounded by pillows his mother had arranged just so. The pain was better. Not gone, but manageable with regular Tylenol now, instead of the strong stuff from the hospital. His father had just left for his security shift, and his mother was in the kitchen making lunch when they heard it. The distinctive sound of expensive tires on their cracked driveway. "Michael," his mother called. "Are you expecting visitors?" He wasn't. The hospital had discharged him yesterday, and he wasn't due for a checkup until next week. Through his bedroom window, he saw it. A black stretch limousine, gleaming in the Arizona sun, looking completely out of place on their modest street. "Oh, Lord," his mother muttered from the doorway. She was still wearing her apron, flour on her hands from making biscuits. The doorbell rang. Michael could hear neighbors' doors opening, voices murmuring with curiosity. His mother smoothed her hair, wiped her hands on her apron, then seemed to think better of it and took the apron off entirely. She disappeared down the hallway. Voices drifted up from the entryway. "Mrs. Johnson? I'm Richard Thompson. We spoke at the hospital." "Of course, please come in." "My wife, Catherine, and this is Sarah." Michael's heart jumped. Sarah was here? Michael's upstairs. He's still recovering. "We won't stay long." Footsteps on the stairs. His mother appeared first, followed by the entire Thompson family. Mr. Thompson in another expensive suit, Mrs. Thompson looking elegant even in casual clothes, and Sarah in a wheelchair pushed by a private nurse. Sarah looked different from the last time he'd seen her. Still pale, still thin, but her eyes were brighter. More alive. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Michael replied, suddenly conscious of his Star Wars pajamas and unmade bed. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. We hope to catch your father, too. He's at work, Michael's mother said. Night security? Ah, yes. Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Well, we wanted to come in person, to express our gratitude. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward. The doctors say Sarah's numbers are improving faster than they expected. The transplant was... Her voice caught. It was exactly what she needed. Michael glanced at Sarah, who rolled her eyes slightly at her parents' formality. He had to hide a smile. We've had our lawyers draw up some papers, Mr. Thompson continued, pulling an envelope from his suit jacket. A trust fund for your future education, and compensation for your mother's missed work, plus... No. Everyone turned to look at Michael. What? Mr. Thompson blinked. I don't want money. The words came out firm, surprising even himself. Sarah's face broke into a grin, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Michael, his mother started, maybe we should... No, Mom. Michael sat up straighter, ignoring the twinge in his hips. I didn't do it for money. Mr. Thompson looked flustered. We understand that, but surely... I did it because it was right, Michael said. Because Sarah needed help, and I could help. That's all. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of neighbor kids playing outside. Through his window, Michael could see several news vans pulling up to the curb. Mrs. Thompson sank into the chair by his bed, her expensive perfume mixing with the smell of his mother's biscuits wafting up from the kitchen. When we found out our only match was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. When we learned who you were, some of us, we weren't kind. Some of us were downright awful, Sarah interrupted. You can say it, Mom. Mrs. Thompson nodded. We were scared and prejudiced and wrong about so many things. Mr. Thompson stepped forward. The trust fund isn't charity, Michael. It's an investment in someone who proved to be worth investing in. Someone who showed more character than most adults I know. Including you, Dad? Sarah asked, but she was smiling. Especially me? Mr. Thompson's formal facade cracked slightly. I've spent my life building things, buildings, businesses, wealth. But you build a bridge. Between our families. Between our worlds. Richard, Mrs. Thompson said softly, nodding toward the window where camera crews were now setting up. Mr. Thompson sighed. The media followed us. I'm sorry. We could have them removed. It's okay, Michael's mother said. They'll leave eventually. Sarah wheeled herself closer to Michael's bed. Up close, he could see the same surgical tape on her arms that he had on his, the same hospital bracelet they hadn't cut off yet. So, she said, about that trust fund? Sarah, her mother warned. What? I'm just saying if you won't take it for yourself. Take it for me? Sarah's eyes twinkled. It's the least you can do after stealing my bone marrow. Michael laughed, then winced as his hips protested. Pretty sure I gave you bone marrow. Details, Sarah waved her hand. But seriously, you walked into that operating room for me. Let me do this for you. Michael looked at his mother, saw the worry lines around her eyes. Worry about bills, about his future, about everything money could solve and everything it couldn't. Maybe, he said slowly, maybe we could use it for something else. Like what? Mr. Thompson asked. Like a scholarship program. For other kids who might need help someday. Medical help, or school help, or just help. The room went quiet again, but different this time. Like the air itself was holding its breath. A scholarship program, Mr. Thompson repeated. For kids from both sides of town, Michael added. Because sometimes the only difference between people is the chances they get. Sarah's grin got wider. See? This is why I'm keeping him. As a friend, she added quickly when her mother's eyebrows rose. Outside, the media crews were multiplying. Someone was knocking on their door. The smell of burning biscuits drifted up from the kitchen. Oh! Michael's mother hurried out. I believe, Mr. Thompson said slowly, that we can work with that idea. A joint initiative, perhaps. The Thompson-Johnson Scholarship Fund. Johnson-Thompson, Sarah corrected. He did do all the hard work. More knocking at the door. More news vans arriving. More neighbors gathering on the street. We should go, Mrs. Thompson stood. You need your rest, both of you. But before they left, Sarah wheeled back to Michael's bed. Thanks, she said quietly. Not for the marrow. Well, yes for that, but thanks for showing them. All of them. Showing them what? that the size of someone's heart matters more than the size of their bank account. As the Thompsons made their way downstairs, Michael could hear his mother talking to the reporters gathering outside. No comment at this time. Please respect our privacy. Both families will make a statement later. Sarah's wheelchair bumped carefully down each step, her father hovering protectively behind her. Her mother paused in Michael's doorway. "You're an extraordinary young man, Michael Johnson." After they left, his mother brought up slightly burnt biscuits and fresh lemonade. They ate together on his bed, watching through the window as the Thompsons' limousine navigated through the media circus. "You sure about turning down that trust fund?" she asked. Michael nodded, his mouth full of biscuit. "Sure about making it into something bigger?" His mother smiled, brushing crumbs from his blanket. "Your grandmother would be proud." Outside, the media frenzy continued. But inside his room, with the afternoon sun streaming through his window and the taste of his mother's biscuits on his tongue, Michael felt at peace. His phone buzzed. Sarah again, already pestering Dad about the scholarship program. He's pretending to be annoyed, but I can tell he's impressed. "We make a good team?" Michael smiled. Maybe that's what his grandmother meant about right things and hard things. Maybe sometimes they turned into bigger things, better things. Things that could bridge any distance, heal any divide, connect any two worlds. One biscuit at a time. 2 weeks after the surgery, Michael stood at his locker, trying to ignore the stares and whispers that followed him through the hallway. His first day back at school felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. "Yo, it's the Millionaire," someone called out. Actually, Michael turned to face Tommy Martinez, his longtime classmate. "I turned down the money." Tommy's jaw dropped. "You what? Man, are you crazy? The Thompsons are loaded." Before Michael could respond, Ms. Chun, his science teacher, stepped into the hallway. "Michael, could I see you for a moment?" In her classroom, she gestured for him to sit. "I saw the news coverage," she said, "about the scholarship program you proposed." Michael shifted in his chair, his hips still tender. "It's not official yet, but it will be." She smiled. "You know, I have a student who needs a heart valve replacement. Her family can't afford it. I was wondering." The bell rang, cutting her off. Students began filing in. "Send me their information," Michael said, standing. "I'll talk to the Thompsons." During lunch, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hospital checkup today. Come with." He had his own follow-up appointment anyway. His mother picked him up early from school, and they drove to Phoenix General. The hospital felt different now, less intimidating, more familiar. In the parking lot, they met Sarah and her mother. Sarah was walking now, slowly but steadily. "Race you to Dr. Roberts' office," she grinned. "Not funny," both mothers said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. The checkups went well. Michael's incisions were healing cleanly. Sarah's body showed no signs of rejecting the transplant. Her numbers, Dr. Roberts said, were remarkable. "It's like they were meant to match," the nurse said as she drew their blood. "1 in several 100,000. And you two found each other." After the appointments, they sat in the hospital cafe, the Thompsons, the Johnsons, Dr. Roberts, and a representative from the hospital board. Coffee and tea steamed in paper cups as they discussed the scholarship program. "We've had 17 applications already," Mr. Thompson said, spreading papers across the table. "And that's just from word of mouth." Michael picked up one application. A 10-year-old needed spinal surgery. Another showed a teenager requiring diabetes treatment. "The hospital has agreed to partner with us," Dr. Roberts added. "Reduced rates for scholarship recipients. And my law firm will handle the paperwork pro bono," Mr. Thompson said. "We'll need a committee to review applications. Someone who understands both sides of town." Michael's mother straightened in her chair. "I might know some people. From work, from church." "Perfect." Mrs. Thompson pulled out her tablet. "We'll need their resumes." She stopped, realizing what she'd said. The old awkwardness threatened to descend. But Michael's mother just laughed. "I'll ask them to put on their Sunday best for the interviews." Later that afternoon, Michael and Sarah sat in the hospital garden while their mothers discussed committee logistics. "Aunt Diana called to apologize," Sarah said, picking at her bandage. "Actually apologize. Not just that fake sorry not sorry thing she usually does." "How'd that go?" "I hung up on her," Sarah grinned, then called her back and made her listen to me talk about systemic inequality for an hour. Michael laughed. "You're evil." I learned from the best. You're the one who turned down a fortune to make everyone work together instead. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a helicopter landed on the hospital roof, bringing another patient, another story. I have to start chemotherapy next week, Sarah said suddenly. To make sure everything stays good. Michael turned to look at her. Scared? Yeah, but... She shrugged. I walked through those surgery doors too, you know? Maybe not literally like some people, but... We've got this, Michael said, echoing their text from that morning. Yeah, Sarah smiled. We do. Their mothers called them in for final paperwork. As they walked back, Sarah asked, You know what the best part of all this is? What? Nobody sees us anymore and thinks the cleaning lady's son or the rich girl. They just see us. She was right. The hospital staff, the other patients, even the Thompsons' wealthy friends, they all looked at Michael differently now. Not with pity or judgment, but with respect. As they reached the hospital entrance, a young boy was being wheeled in, looking terrified at the sight of all the medical equipment. Hey, Michael said, stopping beside the wheelchair. First time? The boy nodded, clutching his mother's hand. I was scared too, Michael told him. But you know what? Hospitals are just buildings where brave people help other brave people. The boy's grip on his mother's hand loosened slightly. Really? Really? And sometimes the bravest people are the ones in the wheelchairs. After the boy disappeared inside, Sarah nudged Michael's shoulder. Smooth. Learn from the best. That evening, back home, Michael found a letter in his backpack. It was from Ms. Chin's student, the one who needed the heart valve. Inside was a drawing of two stick figures holding hands. One tall, one short, one dark, one light. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Thompson Johnson Medical Scholarship Fund announces first recipients. No, he thought. Johnson Thompson. Sarah would throw a fit when she saw that. He smiled and opened his messages to text her, but she'd beaten him to it. Did you see? They got the name wrong again. Dad's fixing it. Also, Aunt Diana wants to be on the committee. I told her she has to volunteer at the free clinic first. Michael looked around his small bedroom. Everything was the same. The cracked walls, the secondhand furniture, the view of their modest street. But everything was different too, because sometimes change didn't look like trust funds or limousines. Sometimes it looked like two families sharing coffee in a hospital cafe. Like a scholarship application written in shaky handwriting. Like a boy in a wheelchair finding his courage. His mother called him for dinner. The smell of her cooking filled the house. Simple food made with love, the same as always. His father would be home soon from his security shift, tired but proud. Michael took one last look at the stick figure drawing before heading to the kitchen. The two figures held hands across the paper, bridging the white space between them. Just like in real life. Because in the end, that's all any of this had been about. Reaching across spaces, building bridges, finding courage in unexpected places. And maybe that was the real gift. Not the bone marrow or the scholarship fund, or even the changed minds. Maybe the real gift was learning that courage, like blood, runs deeper than skin. That healing comes in many forms, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk through a door. Or help someone else find the strength to walk through theirs.